Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Kim Tucker with Mid-America Association of Real Estate Investors, and I'm here today with Joe Varnadore from Note School. He is going to be our guest in May, and we wanted to learn a little bit more about note investing, what it is, and everything. So I met Joe several years ago when I was at a Note School event, and he's been doing this business for quite a while. He bought his first property at 19, which is pretty amazing. And through all the business, he discovered note investing in about 1990, and he was joining Note School when I met him several years ago. So he's been doing this for a long time. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Joe, what did I miss on your bio?
All right. So, hey, guys, it's Joe Varnadore, and thank you, Kim, so much for allowing me to spend some time with you today, and as well as your members. So as you said, I at a very early age, I bought my first property. So I was 19 years old, and that was 1978. So let me kind of give you even a little more of a background than that. So both of my parents were entrepreneurs, and so they pushed me to be an entrepreneur as well. And my father had Western Auto stores. So you guys probably, being in Kansas City, have seen that historic Western Auto sign in downtown Kansas City. So that was kind of what I did growing up through high school. And so my dad said, look, you need to, I know you want to work in this business, but I know you want to be a real estate investor as well. So I went out and looked, and I found my first ugly house, Kim, and it was certainly very ugly and smelly and all of that. And I'll never forget walking through that place. And I looked over at my dad and I said, Dad, this place is really nasty, dude. Is this what I really want to do? And I'll never forget, he looked over at me and he said something that I've never forgotten all these years later, I guess about 40 years later. He said, son, it smells like money to me. So I had the bug. I had been bitten, literally not from a bug in the house, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm sure that happened too a few times.
So anyway, so between 1978 and 1990, I did a lot of buy, fix, and sell, and did some landlording and all of that. And guys, we're here to talk about notes today, and I'm certainly here not to take you from the bricks and mortar side or the property side of the business that a lot of you are doing now. But what I want to show you is how, by understanding the other side of the real estate business, which is the note side of the business, you can certainly build your business into something that you can make a whole lot more money doing if you just add notes to what you're doing today. So anyway, Kim, I found the note business in 1990, and I kind of stumbled upon it, and I had a mentor that taught me what that meant, and the idea of buying notes at a discount or discounting cash flow, and he even taught me how to use the old Hewlett Packard, the HP 12B or 12C. So that was many years ago. But what I realized when I discovered the note side of the business that it was something that let me be a whole lot more creative than if I just did the property side of the business. So, as I've moved forward, it's made all the difference in the world in what I've done and what I've been able to successfully do for 28 years now. And as you kind of mentioned, I've done over 10,000 notes. Wow. And it has certainly been, it's been a whole lot of fun. It's been a whole lot of fun. I work with a very good friend of yours, Kim, and a very good friend of mine, and his name is Eddie Speed. And Eddie started Note School. But I'll even go back a little further than that. Eddie actually founded Colonial Funding Group back in 1980. So guys, we've been in the loan business, in the note business since 1980 as a company with Colonial Funding Group, which buys and sells performing, non-performing loans every day in the market. But we also, have the training side of the business as well, which is Note School, and that's been around since, about 2003, 2004. And Eddie saw, he's visionary, and he saw the opportunity to be able to train folks in the note business that at a high level that nobody else is doing out there in the industry.
I know. I think, when did I first come to Note School? I came to a Note School event, I want to say in 2013, and I have to say that adding notes to my business, it just made my kind of just took the business to a different level. So it opened up new avenues that I could take. Wholesaling houses. I have a new way to make money off of wholesaling houses. If I don't want to be a landlord anymore, which I don't, I can sell or finance the house and get the same mailbox money without having to go fix a toilet or evict a tenant or, just dealing with the whole drama of tenants. So I go say having notes in my business has taken it to another level.
Well, and you're right. And I don't want to pick on any landlords out there. And when I'm doing a class, either, the shorter version of the class, which I'll be doing on Tuesday evening, May 8th, or the longer version, which we'll be doing on Saturday, all day on Saturday, the 12th. I always say, guys, the thing about being a landlord is that once you become a landlord, it is so easy. It's just passive. You never have to do a thing again. And first thing people do, Kim, is they kind of look at me and they go, is this guy for real? And then they start laughing and realize that I was kind of joking with them, right?
Right.
So, it becomes, people go, oh, no, it's not really that passive. And I go, yeah, I get that. And, we have something that I'll show when we have a little more time when I'm there next month. But it's called The Growth of a Real Estate Investor. And I'm sure you've seen that, Kim, if you've seen one of the presentations that either Eddie or I have done over the last year or so. But The Growth of a Real Estate Investor basically shows, real estate investors will typically start out as a bird dog. And then, they get a little bit smarter and a little bit more experience. And then they start wholesaling properties. And then once they've done some of those and kind of mastered that, then the next step is going to be, a fix and flipper. And so I can make a little bit of money as a bird dog, and I can make a little more money as a wholesaler, and then I can make a whole lot more money if I do the fix and flip. And then, of course, the ultimate piece there was becoming the landlord. And that's kind of there's some iterations off that, like lease options or sandwich lease options and some of these other pieces, but, that kind of does it on the property side.
Yeah.
And what we look at on the note side is there literally is about 18 different strategies on the note side that will take your business into a level that, as you learn each of these strategies in the note space, that you'll just see it grow into something. And again, I'm not picking on landlords, but I can tell you that I found for myself, and I know you just said you did, was that it's a lot easier to be the bank than it is to be the landlord.
Yeah, I love it. I just get these I don't even get checks in the mail. It goes to my servicer. I get an email that says I deposited money in your bank.
Right.
Here you go.
Yep.
And that's all I have to do.
I got it. And we're gonna talk about how to do this, because one of the questions I always get when I'm doing a presentation, one of the first questions I get, because inventory seems to be a big problem, right, Kim? And
right.
Because as there's not a lot of prices are going up, because there's not a lot of inventory out there, not a lot of houses to invest in, and all of those things. So one of the first questions I get is, so is this going to be like the housing part of that? I was just in San Antonio, Texas, and they have a 3-month supply of available housing on the market. Well, a healthy market is 6 months supply. And so, San Antonio or Kansas City or San Diego, California, or, West Palm Beach, Florida, it doesn't matter. We are all sitting in that same position where there's not as much inventory as we would like to see. And so one of the things I'm gonna go through here quickly today, and we'll go through it in a lot more depth on Tuesday and Saturday in May, is that if we're looking at non-performing notes, there's plenty of inventory there. And so the next piece of that is the next question I get is, so Joe, I heard notes are complicated. And that's one of the things that kind of holds people back. Notes are no more complicated than doing a wholesale deal, may even be less, or a buy, fix, and sell deal, because you're dealing with a piece of paper with the promissory note versus having to deal with the property. So, Kim, what's the big thing we need to tell people as we start moving forward? Is it what is a note?
Yeah, we might want to know exactly what is a note, because I'm sure there's a few people out there that don't know. So let's explain that.
Okay, so guys, there you go. So to kind of put it in its simplest form, if you went out car shopping this afternoon and you found yourself found a car, and you would make your deal on your car, and then you'd go in and talk to a finance guy, and you'd make your deal on the loan, and basically you would, and you're going to finance it. Obviously, you're going to agree to pay for that car over time, right? You're going to sign the papers, and you're going to drive away with the keys to the car, and you're going to walk away with the title to the car as well, Kim, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, we're not going to walk away with the title. We're gonna get the title when we pay for the car, right?
Yeah, I got mine yesterday. Yay.
Yeah, there you go. So you paid a car off yesterday, right?
Yes, we did.
So if we're looking, of course, we're not here to talk about car notes, obviously. But guys, so when we're talking about a note, we're talking about the loan that you're going to get on the property that you're buying. So whether you're going to Bank of America or Quicken Mortgages or Rocket or Wells Fargo, whatever it is, you're going to go to a closing. If your seller is financing the property, you heard Kim and I both mention seller financing. If the seller is financing, you're going to go in and you're going to sit down and you're going to sign a lot of papers. Kim, I always say it's like being at a Las Vegas blackjack table, right? This closing officer is throwing documents for you to sign, one right after the other. They just want you to sign them and keep your mouth shut and let them do their job, right?
The last closing I went to was a refinance when I actually was at note school. So I had a mobile notary met me in Dallas at note school. And she said it took a half a ream of paper to print out everything she brought to me. It was 1.5 inches thick.
I know. So that's a lot of paperwork. But the most important piece of paper or document that you sign is the mortgage loan agreement, the promissory note. So, Kim, I can see, there you go. So what is a promissory note, and what are we talking about here? So, guys, that is the piece, the document that you sign, and the note contains the terms of the agreement. So, is it $125,000 loan for at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% interest for 30 years? What's the monthly payment going to be amortized over that period of time? So what you're agreeing to do is by signing this note, you're agreeing to pay your house a payment every month for 15, 20, 30 years. So a note is also called, a home loan, but it's most commonly known as a mortgage. Well, the mortgage is a security agreement, and the promissory note is your agreement to pay the loan back over time. And I always say, Kim, it's an amortized loan, right? So amort means to kill off. And so in Latin, so if you have a 30-year loan, it is a slow, painful death, right? You're paying a lot of interest up front. I always use the joke, the banks kind of have it figured out. Well, I'd rather be the bank than be the landlord. So the banks know that they'll, give you a 30-year loan, and that most people either refinance or sell the house and go buy another house after 5 to 7 years. And, over that first 5 years, 96% of what you've paid is what? It's interest. So, the banks figured it out. So if you'll click on that next slide, Kim, and we'll kind of show them what this means. So as the owner of the house, you actually have the deed to the property. When I said when you buy a car, your lender holds the title to the car until you write the last check, right? Make the last payment, then you get the title. With a house, well, when you sell the house, the ownership deed transfers from the seller over to the buyer. And then once you do that, if you click over there, it'll go from one to the other. There you go. So the deed goes to the borrower, and the mortgage note goes down to the bank. So what happens there is that the property owner, the new buyer, owns the house, and they also have the deed to the property. There you go. That's pretty cool, Kim. I've not done it like that, but that looks good. So the borrower owns the house, has the deed to the property. The bank or the lender holds the note. That's their security behind that. So if the borrower stops making their payments, if they default on their loan, then the bank, the lender, has to sue the borrower in order to get the deed to the property back. So when we're talking about a promissory note, that is the piece of paper that secures that property so that the lender has security in making a loan to you that you agree to pay over time. So again, borrower owns the house, holds the title, the deed to the house, the bank owns the note. So what we're talking about is that piece of paper. So no matter if you're buying a house with seller financing or you're buying it with a conventional loan, there's always a promissory note. There's always a promise to pay. So when we're talking about a note, that's exactly what we mean, and being in the paper side of that. So Kim, everybody's always thought that there's two distinct parts to this thing here, right? There's the property side, and that's what a lot of people know, and then there's the note side, and not as many know. So if I have 100 people in a room and I kind of say, hey guys, how many of you have bought a house with seller financing or sold a house with seller financing, or maybe you've bought a non-performing note and you've worked that out, then how many of you have done that? And out of that 100 people, there may be 5, right? There may be 4 or 5, but everybody else don't. And here's what's really interesting is that in most markets, that you have the 95 people that are chasing the very few houses that you can buy at a discount, right? So you got everybody kind of chasing the same deal. And then you've got 4 or 5 people over here that, they know the 4 or 5, strategies in real estate in the property side, but they don't know these 18 or 17 or 18 other strategies on the note side. So these folks over here, there's 5 of those people chasing 95 note deals versus 95 people chasing the same 5 houses out there. So it's a whole lot less competition. And again, it's really a whole lot less work. So, our goal is to make you, at Note School, is to make you a deal architect and show you how to kind of build your own little bank. And that's what you've been doing for the last 5-6 years, Kim.
Yes. And it's kind of nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next? What are we looking at next here?
Okay, well, you're talking about all these 18 strategies. Let's pick the top 6 niches in notes. What are the top 6 niches that you're seeing people using notes for?
Okay. That's a great question. So what we've got is at this point in time, we've kind of gone in and we've said, okay, what's the top things out there for 2018? Things that are a little bit different than they were in 2017, 2016. So we've identified those top 6 niches for you. And as we kind of progress through what we're going to be doing in May, we'll on Tuesday night, the 8th of May, Kim will give me about an hour and 15 minutes or so to kind of give you the 35,000 foot view of the note business. And then on Saturday, the 12th, we'll have all day to spend together. We'll go through and I'll be able to expand on that and give you a kind of the 5,000 foot view. And then a lot of folks will decide to come to one of our 3-day classes and we'll take you down to ground level with that. So anyway, so the 6 biggest niches. First one is non-performing notes from banks and hedge funds. So, Kim, I mentioned that and sometimes people look at me and they go, wow, why would you want to buy a note on a house that the borrower's not paying on? And, the biggest answer to that obviously is, well, because of the price. We can buy the non-performing note for about 25% of what the as-is value of the property would be. So,
Excellent.
it makes sense, right? When we're buying at about a 75% discount. So non-performing notes, one of the biggest niches. The second one is going to be, and we'll come back in a second after kind of we run through these 6 guys. And I'll kind of break them down and we'll spend a few minutes on each one of these. Reperforming notes. So there's non-performing notes from banks and hedge funds, and then there's reperforming notes from banks and hedge funds as well. So that simply means that, some of the banks have kind of modified these loans for borrowers, and loans that were once non-performing, meaning the borrower wasn't paying as agreed, well, they've kind of worked through them maybe with a HAMP or a HARP modification. HAMPs have gone away, but they went away last year. But there's still the HARP mods, and there's some of these others. So we can buy those. Now, obviously, if we're buying a reperforming loan, we're going to pay a little bit more for it. We may pay up to 60 or 70% of the as-is value of the property. Okay? So reperforming notes. And then selling with seller financing. So this is on the performing side. And Kim, you mentioned this is what you absolutely love to do. And I do too. And I had 47 single family rent houses. And, that's a lot of work, even with the property manager, right? And so over a period of time, I sold all of those single family rent houses basically, I sold a lot of them to the people that had been renting them from me for a long period of time. And, the interesting thing is when we're selling with seller finance, most people don't know how to create a good loan that can be sellable, that has a high value out there. And, you can also sell any of these loans. I could sell a performing loan I could sell the loan. I could sell you the property, Kim, with seller financing. And then at some point in time, if I wanted to sell the balance of the loan, I could do that as well.
Well, we have an investor here in town, a landlord. He has a lot of long-term tenants in his rental properties in a city that's decided they want to, regulate the landlord a lot more. So he decided that he was just going to seller finance to his long-term tenants and no longer be a landlord and solve his problem.
Absolutely. Well, we know, Kim, you and I both know. I mean, it's typically the tenant has more rights than the landlord does, right? And when you're the bank, so Kim, if you're the landlord and the water heater, bursts overnight, well, the person that owns the house or the person that is renting the house to you, that's who you call, right? Well, if you owe Bank of America, you certainly don't call Bank of America. You call a plumber. So, and really what I'm getting here with this is I want your people, your members, to know, Kim, that everybody thinks you got to have a ton of money to go into the note business. And guys, I can tell you that anything you can do with a house, you can also do with a note. So I can earn fee income from wholesaling notes. So I can get a note under contract for one price, and I can sell the contract on buying that note to Kim maybe, and I can make a fee from wholesaling the note. So I can make fee income. I'll show you 3 or 4 different case studies of how you can make fee income by wholesaling a note. So Kim, you know how that works. You can get a property under contract at a lower price, flip the contract, assign the contract to somebody else at a little higher price, and make some money. And you don't have to have a whole lot of cash to do that. You don't have to have any cash if you don't, if you've got the right person to buy. So, that's another part of that. And we'll get a little deeper into that in just a second. Turnkey seller finance. I know you've got a lot of landlords in the Kansas City area. And, this is really a piece of the business that allows landlords to exit being a landlord by selling their houses, their rental houses to an investor that really is looking for a good investment. So what you would end up being if you sold your loaded house, the house that has a good long-term tenant in that property, to a person that wants to be a landlord. Well, the interesting thing about that is, Kim, and especially in a market like Kansas City, you've got the cash comp price on a house, right? What the comps may say it's worth. So the comps may say a house is worth $50,000, $60,000, but the house will rent for $1,000. So what most folks don't realize is that when you've got a loaded cash flow property with a tenant in the property, you can sell the house based on with a tenant already in there based on the income of the property. And so the house may be worth $90,000 or $100,000 based on the income from the property. So we're going to go through turnkey seller financing, and then the last one there is buying the seller financing. So, most folks that are out there either doing wholesaling or doing buy, fix, and sell, Kim, they're having to make a lot of offers in order to get one. So we've kind of made it a quest to go out at Note School and talk to a lot of these folks that are doing, maybe 15 or 20 houses a year, or they're doing 80 or 100 or 200 or 300 either wholesale properties or buy, fix, and sell properties. And the challenge that they have is that they're all chasing the same property. So what we found and what statistics we've found is that you've got to make 20 offers in order to get one acceptance. So what that means, and because you're all offering the same thing, right? Well, the $100,000 house, we're all trying to buy it for $70,000, $75,000 cash, right? And so everybody's kind of chasing the same deal, and all their deals look alike. So by just simply adding, if you're making 20 offers, or if you're working with 20 properties in order to get one, that means you're succeeding 5% of the time and you're failing 95% of the time. So simply by asking the owner, what is your real challenge here? Now look, Kim, if you're selling the property, I'll certainly make you a cash offer that I can close in 2 or 3 days, or 4, 5, or 6, or 7 days. That's what the offer that everybody else has made. But I will also offer that seller terms. So look, I'll give you the $70,000 that Kim's, that everybody else out there will give you. But I'm going to give you a second offer on your property. You're asking 100? I'll give you 100. Let me pick the terms on this. Why don't you seller finance the property for me? And I can tell you that most investors out there kind of get locked in their brain, right? And that, you know, everybody wants cash. Everybody's got a money problem. Well, not everybody has a money problem. Some people just simply have a real estate problem. So by simply offering a seller finance, a terms deal where they'll seller finance for you, I'll promise you we can double your results and maybe triple it without spending another dollar on marketing. So Kim, I'm going to kind of break these down real quick, and we'll just kind of go from there. I've talked about some of them in a little bit of depth, but one that I do want to spend a couple of minutes on, because I always get a lot of questions on, you know, like I said before, why would somebody want to buy a loan on a house that they're not paying on? So simply put, let me tell you guys a little story. So we all know that between 2004 and 2007, 2008, that basically, Kim, you could get a loan to buy a house if you could fog a mirror or you had a pulse, right? So, yeah, if you could sign your name, and in some cases, you know, people were, anyway, we won't talk about that. But anyway, you could pretty much get a loan to buy a house. And so, interestingly enough, home ownership peaked in the fall of 2006. Home ownership got up to almost 70%, like 69.7%. Historically, since 1965, home ownership had always hovered at somewhere between 62 and 63%. So because of all of the easy loans, the subprime loans, the Alt-A loans, all these crazy loans that you could get, the no income, no verification, all of those loans, home ownership, we saw it go up to almost 70%. And Kim, do you know what home ownership, what the percentage of home ownership is today?
It's probably right around 66, 67%, I think.
Actually, it's actually down about 63.5%. So the real home ownership rate is somewhere between 63 and 64% or something like that. So when it increased from 63 to 64 to almost 70%, and then it's back down to that, well, that's these non-performing loans that we see out there. And by 2000, as this kind of went on, and Kim, I'll say this, for those of you guys that are out there that are listening, if you were buying REO properties, bank-owned properties in 2009, 10, 11, 12, you were exactly where you needed to be. That's where the big discounted properties were. So we could buy a REO property because there were so many of them. We could buy them, for 45, 55, 60% of value. Well, we all know that that's changed, right? We're having to pay a whole lot more for that. So that means that a whole lot more people are chasing the same deal. So what has become the value buy today is non-performing loans. So let me just explain to you real quick why. So by 2012, 13, late 2013, we know that there was somewhere between 11 and 12 million non-performing loans, first mortgages in the United States that were non-performing, 11 to 12 million. Historically, the default rate on single-family first mortgages between 1980 and 2006 was somewhere around, well, it was less than 1%. And so it went from less than 1% all the way up by 2008, 2009 to almost 34%. So that means that the number of houses that the borrowers were living in, or maybe they had already moved out, that they weren't making their payments went from less than 1% to all the way up almost to 35%. And what that represented was about 11 million non-performing loans. So the SAFE Act and Dodd-Frank kind of kicked in on January 10th, 2014. And what happened there, what part of the Dodd-Frank SAFE Act, and guys, I'll go through what that means in more detail. I know most of you do know what that means, but one of the pieces of the SAFE Act was that all banks, lending institutions, including Fannie, Freddie, HUD, FHA, VA, all of these people that were out there in the lending business or guaranteeing loans. They all had to meet what was called the Dodd-Frank or the SAFE Act stress test, meaning that, these banks could hold on to these non-performing loans if they wanted to, but if they did, they would have to increase their reserves, take money out of their lending pool and put it over into the non-performing lending pool. So it really was going to put a challenge on these different commercial banks as well as the GSEs. And the GSEs are the government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie, Freddie, and HUD. So that started the ball rolling. So, Kim, on June 11th, 2014, HUD had the first large-scale sale of non-performing loans. HUD sold 23,203 non-performing loans in one day. So, yeah, they didn't sell those one at a time, though. So what they did was hedge funds. Hedge funds like Granite and Gemini and Bayview and Watermark and Roosevelt. There was about 7 different hedge funds, private equity funds, that went out and bought these non-performing loans. So HUD was the first one to start selling. Then, of course, Fannie and Freddie jumped on the market or started selling in the spring of 2015. The commercial bank started selling in January of 2015. And I always ask everybody, Kim, so, have you read the Big Short, or if you saw the movie, the Big Short written by Michael Lewis, and that kind of explains what happens. But there's one, when this kind of kicked off and the commercial banks started selling. Well, we know that that Countrywide was taken over by Bank of America, right? It was Bank of America was highly incentivized to take over Countrywide. So they did. And so in January of 2015, some of these Countrywide loans were starting selling, right? So in January of 2015, these Countrywide loans. I think I've just repeated myself. Anyway, I kind of my tongue gets tied when I start talking about this because it's just so crazy. So the first batch of these loans that were sold were loans that had been originated by Countrywide in 2004, 2005. So in this pool of loans that was being offered by Bank of America, Countrywide loans through Bank of America, there was $964.7 million in unpaid principal balance. Now, these loans were originated in 04-05. They didn't get around selling them until January of 2015, and when that $964.7 million in loans were sold in bulk, they sold for $45 million. So that means they sold at a 95% discount. And people always say, well, Joe, who do you think covered the difference between the $915 million difference between the 964 and the 45 million? So, yeah, that was covered by the U.S. taxpayers, right, Kim? So anyway, that is kind of the background story, and I'll wrap it up by telling you this. So Eddie Speed is, very dear friend of Kim's, a very good friend of mine as well. Eddie had a great idea in 2013, and that was that he could. Because when a hedge fund sold 1,000 loans, or when a bank sold 1,000 loans to a hedge fund, well, they sold them at about a 95% discount off of as-is value. But when they were selling these, they weren't selling them on a one-off basis, Kim. They were selling them, they'd buy 1,000 and sell, 40 to one investor and 90 to another and 150 to another. So there really wasn't a play for the single real estate investor. So Eddie went to 5 different hedge funds, and Eddie, he's grew up in Mississippi, lives in Texas, got a real Texas twang. And could you imagine him going in and talking to these big shot hedge fund managers, right? have loved to have been a fly on the wall, right? Anyway, so Eddie makes his pitch. He said, look, he said, I have a company called Note School. We train people in the note business at a very high level. And I know you've been selling these non-performing loans to investors 25, 50, 100, 120 at a time. And, what my question is, guys, wouldn't it make a lot of sense for you to sell to people that I've trained, that Eddie had trained in the note business through Note School, sell them one at a time to Note School students? So, Kim, I think you probably know the answer to what those first 5 big shot hedge fund managers said. They pretty much said no, right? We don't want to get involved in that. So Eddie went to a 6th hedge fund manager, to a company called Gemini, and run by a gentleman by the name of Jack Cruppy. And you've met Jack, I'm sure, Kim, throughout the years. He's always at the Note Expo events and so on. And I always say that Jack looks like the Incredible Hulk, but with good skin. So Eddie went to Jack, and he kind of told Jack the same thing, right? Sell these to our students on a one-off basis where they can buy one at a time. They don't have to buy 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 at a time. And so Jack said, he didn't say no. He said, but look, he said, I will do this. We will try this. But the second it gets too crazy with all the questions and all of that, he said, Eddie, as long as you teach people, you guys at Note School, teach people how to buy these, how to work them out, how to price them, how to do the due diligence, how to do all of that, we'll sell the notes to them one at a time. And so that kind of started the ball rolling. The next year, we have Note Expo, and you've been to that, Kim, in Dallas, in the first week of November every year. And it's, for Note School or for any type of note investor in the United States. And it's kind of where the industry bigwigs and, all the hedge funds meet, and the servicing companies that work out these loans for us, and the title companies and the insurance companies and all these companies that kind of work with us. Jack was there, and he said, Eddie, I want to thank you and everybody in this room, because basically it went from zero, selling one at a time, that Note School students, I think it's in 2014, purchased 70 or 60% of the non-performing loans that Gemini bought as a hedge fund. So the moral of that story is now we have all the hedge funds kind of coming to Note School saying, hey, we want to work with your students. So anyway, guys, I'm going to talk a lot more about that and what it means, but bottom line is this. When you buy a non-performing loan from a hedge fund, and by the way, Kim, I'm sure you know this, but we've started our own hedge fund as well, Colonial Capital. And our students can buy non-performing or performing notes directly from Colonial Funding Group. So we'll talk more about that at the event, but that's just something I want to throw out there. But you buy a non-performing loan, and let me just kind of give you the idea here. So, Kim, you live in a house that you owe $150,000 on. It's currently worth $100,000, so you're underwater, and there's still about 3.5 million, almost 4 million underwater homes out there. So you owe 150. It's worth 100. Well, I buy that non-performing loan from a hedge fund for $25,000, and these loans are selling 25 to 50% of as-is value. So if I buy your loan for $25,000, I can certainly, if you want to stay in that house, I can modify your loan. I can drop your unpaid balance from 150 to 100 without ever missing a beat, right? I could even drop your unpaid balance to 80 and give you some equity in your home without missing a beat because of what I've paid for it. If I've paid $25,000 or $30,000 for it, I've got a lot of room in that. And over the years now, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been able to do just that in my note business. I've been able to do that, just that, help somebody stay in their home, get them going again. And it wasn't because these were bad people. It's just they got involved in something and nobody was out there really that was willing to talk to them and help them. And some of these loans have, borrowers hadn't made a loan payment on in 4 or 5 years. And that, like I say, doesn't make them a bad person. It's just nobody was reaching out there to help them, or they just couldn't get it done. So anyway, I just know that I've done about 100, maybe 120 of these non-performing loans where I've modified them for the borrower and kept the borrower there. And I'll tell you, that is a good feeling to be able to keep somebody in their house with dignity after they've been through something that's pretty bad. So I buy your non-performing loan. There's only 3 things that can happen, Kim. Number 1 is just like I talked about. I can modify the loan for you at a real modification, not something that's kind of what we call at note school, extend and pretend. So I can really modify your loan. The second thing, if I can't modify your loan, then the second thing that I would ask you to do would be to sign the deed over in lieu of foreclosure. Now, if you remember when we were first started talking about what is a note, well, the borrower has the deed to the property. The lender has the promissory note. So what that means, or what a deed in lieu means, simply, Kim, if I were to give you a couple $1,000 cash for keys, would you just sign the deed back over to me so that I don't have to foreclose on you? So we know that when you buy a non-performing loan, our statistics say that 40% of the time you'll be able to modify the loan, which means you have a reperforming loan. So Kim, when you have a reperforming loan, you're the bank, right? I mean, you become the bank, and
Right.
you can either keep those payments, you can sell those payments for cash, or you can sell a piece of the payments, called a partial, selling a piece of the loan. Now, we certainly aren't going to get into that on the call today, but we're going to get into it more on Tuesday and Thursday in May. So either I'll modify the loan, I will you'll sign over the deed in lieu of foreclosure. And if number 1 or number 2 doesn't work there, then the third process is I would have to foreclose. So what we know inside of note school is about 40% of the time you're going to get a deed or a modification. About 40% of the time you'll get the deed in lieu, and about 20% of the time you would have to foreclose. And foreclosure isn't a big bad thing. It's a pretty fast process in all but 4 or 5 states, and those states are New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, California, and where I live. I live in Florida, guys. I live in a little town called Okeechobee, Florida. And it is a small town. There's 50,000 people, Kim, in the entire county. And there are 65,000 cows. So there's a lot more cows than there is than there are people, right? So anyway, I'm going to show you how to buy non-performing loans and why that can really give you another way to acquire properties by acquiring the note. So instead of, and kind of the analogy is, so at a house that's worth $100,000, an REO investor or somebody trying to buy the property from a bank that's foreclosed on it, they're going to pay somewhere between 78 and 88% of as-is value. So they're going to pay somewhere between, let's just call it 75 and 85%, or $75,000 to $85,000 on the as-is value for that house. As a note investor, we're going to buy the non-performing loan for somewhere between 25 and 50% of the value, as-is value of the property. So we're going to buy it at $25,000 to $50,000. Most of the time, it's going to be in that lower range of somewhere between 25 and 30% of value, not up to 50. So it's just an amazing way to acquire property. So what I just told you was about 40% of the time, you're going to get a reperforming loan for cash flow, which means about 60% of the time you're going to get the property if that's what you want. And I'll show you how to do all of that and the due diligence and what goes along with that. So I think the cheapest loan I've ever seen purchased, and it may have been by Michelle and Brian, Kim. I think they purchased a non-performing loan one time for about less than $1,000, right?
I got
Oh, you
I
did?
got one for free. Yes, I did not like the pool I was buying. I said it wasn't good enough, so they threw in an extra note that I was not able to foreclose on, but 3 or 4 years later, because the paperwork wasn't quite right, 3 or 4 years later, the loan
Oh my
behind
God.
me, there was a third, they foreclosed and paid me off plus all of my interest and fees and yada yada yada. I made $14,000 on
So,
a loan note I got for free.
how would we even calculate the return on that, Kim?
I didn't worry about it.
It was
$14,000 on
enough, right?
free. I
Now,
thought it was good.
I'll bet one of
Good
our note
enough.
school guys that you know well and I know very well, Russ Brooks. He's an engineer, and I'm sure Russ Brooks could probably tell us what your rate of return was on that. But yeah,
I'm sure
what
he would know.
Eddie or I would say was your return was enough. So guys,
Yes.
Kim, let me just run forward here, and I'm going to go through and just hit some highlights again. The reperforming loans from banks. So the non-performing loans in the lower price band properties, which are somewhere $125,000 in current as-is value or less, are selling for 25 to 50% of as-is value. Reperforming loans are selling for somewhere between 60 and 80% of as-is value for the property. So sometimes the hedge funds and the banks can modify the loans themselves. So we're going to show you how to acquire, where to find these reperforming loans, as well as how to price them. And Kim, I always tell people especially when we're talking about non-performing or reperforming loans, everybody says, well, where do you buy them? Where do you buy them? What's the hedge fund's names? All that kind of stuff. Well, guys, as a note school student, you can buy them directly from Colonial Funding. But I'll tell you that is not the magic. The magic behind non-performing, reperforming notes, and really every type of. Okay, so reperforming loans or reperforming notes from banks and hedge funds, guys. We'll get deeper into that when I'm there in May. But again, just remember, these are notes that were non-performing, but there's been a modification done by the lender. So these are loans that where we're buying non-performing loans at 25 to 50% of as-is value. We would buy a reperforming loan somewhere between 60 and 80% of value because they were non-performing. They've been modified. They've got a 6-month new pay history. And then we can buy those as reperforming loans at a discount as well. And the point I want to make here is simply this. When we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with non-performing loans or we're dealing with reperforming or we're buying or selling with seller financing, whatever it is, a lot of people get hung up on, so how do I find non-performing loans or reperforming loans? And guys, I talked about 4 or 5 different hedge funds a minute ago. I talked about Granite and Gemini and Watermark and Bayview and even Colonial Funding Group, which is our company. But understand that the most important thing as a real estate investor, and guys, we're going to call from here on out, I want you to think of a real estate investor holistically. And what I mean by that is I want you to think of yourself as not only investing in property, but you're also investing in notes or the paper side of the business, because one doesn't work without the other. Does that make sense? I mean, everybody, there's always this financing side to the business. And I always say that, again, banks figured it out a long time ago. And what we want to teach you at Note School is the due diligence. You need to know every time whether it's a good deal, a great deal, or a total waste of time. And the biggest part of it really is knowing the as-is value of the collateral, whether you're buying a house or you're buying the note, because at the end of the day, the property is the collateral. So we want to make sure that you know how to do that due diligence, and you do it every time, over and over and over. You don't skip a step as you're doing that. So reperforming loans, selling with seller financing. Most people, they kind of miss the boat or think, that's kind of I don't know, it's hard, right? And Kim, what we want to teach folks is when they are selling with seller financing, that they're doing it right. They're doing it so that it's SAFE Act compliant because of Dodd-Frank, right? We want to make sure that you're making sure that your borrower can repay the loan. And simply put, that's basically what the SAFE Act and being SAFE Act compliant says. You just need to make sure your borrower can afford the loan, can afford to make their monthly payments. And so we're going to go through that in more detail and more depth. And, you know, whether you, Kim, if you owe a little money on the house or if it's free and clear and you sell it with a note, again, you can sell a house that's got an underlying lien on it, right, by doing a wraparound mortgage. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a whole lot about that when I'm there and we've got more time to expand on that. But I can tell you that selling with seller financing, what we're doing when we're doing that is we're opening up the doors to more deserving buyers that are out there. And I want to show you how to create a good seller finance deal. And Kim, I always tell a story, and I'll tell it real quick. And they'll probably hear this again at the one day class that we'll do. But so it's been about 6 months ago, and this is kind of puts you. It seems, Kim, that when some people sell a house with seller financing, for some reason they just lose their mind, right? Mm-hmm. They just have no idea. So this guy calls me that apparently he had sold. I had bought a performing note from him about 7 or 8 years ago. Guy's from Temecula, California. So he calls me, and I remembered, kind of Temecula. I didn't really remember him, but anyway, so he calls me and I say, okay, you've got another, performing note you want to sell. And he goes, yep. And I said, okay. I said, so, let's talk about the house and the note a little bit. Right. And I said, so how much is the house worth? And how did you determine how much it was worth? He said, well, my friend is a realtor, and he did a broker price opinion for me. He did a BPO on it and said the comps say that it's worth somewhere between $195,000 and $200,000. And I said, okay. I said, what'd you sell the house for? He said, well, I sold it for $165,000. And I said, you just told me that the house was worth somewhere between $195,000 and $200,000. He said, well, Joe, it needed a little bit of work, so I sold it for $165,000. And I said, well, specifically, how much work did it need? And he said, about $10,000. I said, so why didn't you sell it to him for $185,000, $190,000? He said, I don't know. That's just what I did. And I said, okay, if you're right. I said, so what did you do as far as vetting your borrower? Did you check the borrower's credit? Did you look at their income, or did you do any of that? He said, no. The guy told me he had bad credit. So, but I went ahead and sold it to him anyway. Hey, Kim, you know as well as I do, when somebody tells you they have bad credit, they probably have really bad credit.
Yes.
Because, you'll have people say, well, it's not perfect, but it's okay. But when somebody says, I've got bad credit, it's bad. Right. So that was the second thing. So I said, okay, how much of a down payment did you get? And he said, that guy was going to do that work on it, the borrower or the buyer. And so I didn't make him put a down payment on it. I said, hold on just a minute. So you sold him the house for less than market value with bad credit, and you financed it for him with bad credit with no money down. He goes, yep. And I go, okay. So I knew where the conversation was going after that. So when I asked him, so what kind of interest rate did he, you're charging? And he says 3%. And I say, wow, that would be at a minimum 9, 10, 11, 12% loan, right? And then how many years did you do it for? And of course, it was 30 years. And then my final question was, so I just have one question, one last question. Is he paying you? And he says, well, Joe, he's paying me half the payment every other month. And so there you go. So we see this all the time in note school. We buy one-off, performing notes. And of course, this wasn't really a performing note, right?
No, it was not.
No, it was not. But anyway, the moral of this story is we know how a note should be created by someone. And if I can, I'm going to tell you one other quick story. I was down in Houston in January, and I was doing a one-day class like we're going to be doing there on the 12th of May. And lady came up to me at the end of the day. She said, I loved everything about today. And she says, one of the things that just kind of hit me in the face is when you were talking about seller financing. She said her and her husband had bought a house that they rehabbed completely, and they had it on the market for 2 or 3 weeks. They thought it would sell immediately, and they were having people look at it. The house was worth $300,000, and that's what they were asking for it. And she said, well, we're having some problem with people getting qualified, and, debt to income ratio for a lot of folks, or if you're self-employed, you can have problems proving all of your income and all of that. But anyway, so I said, why don't you try with seller financing, right? Put that in your ad. And when most people are putting, advertising seller financing, they basically just say, houses for sale with seller financing. So everybody in the world, whether you've got $1 or $1 million, they call on that, right? We're just going to tell you, look, basically, yeah, you can say seller financing, but say seller financing with a substantial down payment. So long story short, she did this. She called me a week or two later, and she said, Joe, we just wrote a contract on the house, seller financing. Said one of the people that called, we're asking $300,000. He had $100,000 to put down. So I said, that's great. That's 33% down, right? And she said, well, there is one challenge. And I said, okay. She said, well, the guy's credit score is 446. That's pretty bad, isn't it, Kim?
Pretty bad.
But, here's the thing. This man and his wife, they owned a business. She sent me, she redacted the name and all of that. And she said, look the credit report over and let me know what you think. And I said, okay. And look, Kim, this bad things happen to good people all the time. And this guy had a business that, for a while, and it was kind of right after, it's been kind of recent, and, because of the hurricane. Anyway, he had some bad things that happened in his little business. He couldn't pay his bills for a little while. Now he's paying them again, but he's got a low credit score for a while. So it's not like you look at somebody's credit report and they've never paid anybody. These folks had paid up until they had this problem in their life. They've since, gotten back on their feet. They're paying their payments again, but they're stuck with a low credit score for a while. So long story short, she sold them this house for $300,000 with $100,000 down at 10% interest for 10 years. And, she can sell this loan, this performing loan, at any time. So I just wanted to kind of plant those seeds in there so that people will kind of know where we're coming from. We want to show you how to create the right seller finance paper. Fee income, again, I'm going to show you how to do that the right way. And so, guys, if you say, well, I don't have a whole lot of money to buy, a note, guys, I'm going to show you how to make fee income by wholesaling a note. You can wholesale a note. You can wholesale a house. Turnkey seller, again, we're going to talk about that on Saturday in a little more depth. I'll show you how that works and how to determine the income value of a property if you're looking at based on the income. And then finally, buying with seller financing. Kim, people just don't realize, again, the power of offering or just throwing it out there. Most people feel like they have to do like everybody else. I've got to offer this cash. I've got to do a cash offer and close quickly to get a deal. And we know that that's what the herd's doing. That's the herd. Everybody else is kind of going that way. But I can tell you that by learning how to make an offer using seller or buying with seller financing, having your seller or finance the property. Kim, it may be that they just have a house that they need to sell because they don't want to manage the house. Doesn't mean they want all the cash, right? I mean, if you sell a $150,000 house and you get $150,000 in cash, well, most people think, well, everybody wants the cash, right? But if you're not a real estate investor or you're not investing it like we are on a daily basis, it may be a burden for them to take that cash because now they're going to have to take that money and they're going to have to invest it somewhere else to get a good rate of return, right? They're certainly probably not going to throw it into the stock market, right? I mean, we know that's, nobody would argue that it's going nuts, but we don't know when it's going to go south, right? And so, we can offer, we can make an offer, structure an offer where we can buy with seller financing. Like I said before, not everybody has a money problem. Some people have a real estate problem. So guys, we're going to have a huge, we're just going to have a lot of fun when we do this. There's a slide that Kim's going to bring up there, and it's kind of the tools of the trade. And I thought this was pretty cute because, guys, if you're a fix and flipper or rehabber, that toolbox and that hammer and that screwdriver or chisel that's your tools. As a note investor, you got a different set of tools. And what I learned back in 1990 when I got into the note side of the business is that, you know what? It's easier to make money with a pencil than it is with a hammer. And I have never, I've always held that very high. I'm not telling you guys that you'll never invest in another house. I'm just telling you that, or in the property, I'm just telling you that by knowing and by adding the note space onto what you're doing now, some of you are going to say, hey, I'm going to be, I just don't want to be in the property side of the business. I've got a gentleman from Houston right now from that same group that I did. He had 84 rentals. He's looking at selling all of those out as and be the bank. So whatever you are, wherever you are, whether you've not done a deal before, this is your first transaction. And Kim, I know, if your group's just like any other group out there, in that, there are people that come, or that this May 8th may be the first time they come to your group meeting, right? And
Right.
And they've never done a deal, and they're still looking for where to start. So, it doesn't matter if you have any experience on the property side of the business or any experience on the other side of the business. We've got something for you. So if you've never done a deal, or if you're a sophisticated investor that's been doing this, you're what we would call a seasoned investor, right? You've got a lot of experience under your belt. We're going to have something for you. We're going to have the strategies for you as well. So, it's going to be a big time. Kim, what are we going to, let's see. So we're on Tuesday, May 8th. Kim, anything you want to say about that?
Well, I'm going to say, if notes are completely new to you, or even if you're a seasoned investor, I've seen people going and getting into the note business totally brand new, knowing nothing. They had to learn. They didn't have any bad habits to unlearn.
Amen.
And then I've also seen very seasoned investors that have gotten into the note business that just gives them more tools. And I have to say, I've been to we have had 3 different groups of speakers here at Mary since January. One was a guru that came in, and she's the queen of rehab.
Yep.
Yet she taught a whole day and talked a lot of her examples. She used notes. So when she makes 3 different offers to her sellers, one of them is buying with seller finance. Right. Then we had Brian and Michelle come in and speak with 8 different ways they invested in real estate in February, and every one of those deals that they presented had one portion or more of the 6 niches that you've talked about today. And then we had Vina Jones-Cox in March, and she was talking about wholesaling, yet several of her examples allowed her to buy it with seller financing or sell it with seller financing. So she's taking her wholesaling business and her landlording business to the next step by adding notes into it. So I just think it's amazing that all of these investors eventually get to the note business. Members that are also note school students as well, and I've messed this slide up. I don't know what I did. But Joe, Brian and Michelle Winberry are local here, and they have their own meeting on Wednesday at Lucky Brew Group.
And I'm going to certainly be there. Brian and Michelle, yes, they are very seasoned real estate investors and very seasoned note investors as well. And they're great people. They're great people, and I look forward to seeing folks there on Wednesday as well.
And what I'm looking forward to is all day on the 12th. That's going to be a fun day. What are we going to learn? Actually, that's the next slide. What are we going to learn? on the 12th.
Okay, guys. So here's the thing. We're gonna go through real case studies. I'm not going to show you anything that's a theory or this may work or that may work. I'm going to show you some real case studies of recent deals that have been done that our students are doing. I'll show you some of the things that I'm going to teach you, and these are the best ones. For those of you that have a self-directed IRA, if you don't have a self-directed IRA or self-directed 401k, you'll probably want to go out and start one once you go to this one-day class on Saturday the 12th. Guys, it's using it and being able to use that like your own little bank. Building passive cash flow. We were recording some folks that had attended one of our 3-day classes here just recently, and something that one of the ladies said really kind of stuck out to me. And she'd always been a wholesaler, and she'd always been a buy, fix, and sell. And she said, the thing of it is with notes is that you don't have to rinse and repeat, right? That shampoo analogy. And what she meant by that, and I thought about that for a second. I said, what she meant is, you've got to start over at zero every time you flip a house, or you flip you wholesale a house, or you buy, fix, and sell. You got to go out and find another house to flip. So you want to build that long-term passive cash flow. That's what everybody's looking for, really. Brokering notes. So if you don't have a whole lot of money, you don't have any money, I'm going to show you how to broker notes as well. Fee income. How to create the best seller finance notes so that they have the highest value out there. And Kim, partials. Oh, my gosh. Partials, that is like manna from heaven. Albert Einstein said that if you compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, right? If you understand it, you earn it. If you don't understand it, you pay it. So Joe and Eddie and the team at Note School, what we say is that partials are the ninth wonder of the world. So guys, being able to sell a piece of a note, well, that's, like I said, that's nirvana. Turnkey rentals, that's for you guys that are landlords, or some landlords, it's a real income opportunity for you as well. But most importantly, we want you to become a deal architect. A deal architect knows not only the 4 or 5, 6 maybe property strategies, but we want to get you into that 17, 18 note strategies as well. So on Saturday, at the Saturday class, the last thing we're going to go over on Saturday afternoon is that if you have as little as $100 in your self-directed IRA, I'm going to show you how to control a note worth $100,000. Now, I know that's a big, bold statement, but there it is, Kim. There it is. It's out there. The cat's out of the bag. And just for attending on Saturday, we're going to give everybody that attends a mind map that shows the flow of the non-performing side of the business. And I'll suggest when we give that to you, you'll probably want to laminate that and use it over and over as you're showing people what you do. And then finally, I'm going to give everybody that attends a top 10 most costly mistakes that beginning investors make, and that's a DVD that we'll give everyone that attends on Saturday, Kim. So there's...
Bye.